Good evening, everybody. It's once again Ted the Speed Learner, and I'm here to talk about BR549. Now, a lot of you people say, that really wasn't a real telephone number, was it? Most likely it was. But for where it really came from, it really... Well, let me explain, okay? There used to be a TV show called Hee Haw. That's right, Hee Haw, yes. And one of the stars of the show was Junior Samples, and one of the sketches he used to do was he used to do a used car sketch, and he would tell people to call BR549. Now you got to keep in mind this was back in the 1960s, and when you're talking about a farming community back then, you're talking about old-time telephone networking, okay? This isn't like what you have today, all right? Some of these people were probably still using employees with a little switchboard thing, you know, a switchboard operator type thing. Now you say, well, switchboard operator things went away in the mid-1950s. In most places they did, but you have to keep in mind, in these small farming communities way off in the boondocks of the wilderness, they didn't. Okay, and some of this stuff didn't disappear until the early 1970s. Okay, so just because the majority of areas had all switched over by 1955 to a brand new system, which basically we now use today, which is an automated switchboard, there were some real rural communities that still use the old, the employee would go in there and do the switching thing. Of course, that's all gone now, but back in the late 50s, early 60s, that would have not been totally unheard of. Okay, so we got Junior Samples here, and he keeps telling everybody to call BR549. Now, you have to keep in mind that phone numbers back then were set up a little differently than what they are now. They would use some sort of two-letter prefix, and then they would have a series of numbers thereafter, which would identify which house they were trying to call. Okay, and now the people at Hee Haw came up with the BR549 because what they were doing was they were making a joke about the Broad Ring 549 cubic inch engine, which at that time had been produced by the International Motor Company. Now, of course, there's no International Motor Company as I know of that exists today, but back then there was an International Motor Company, and they had made a Broad Ring 549 cubic inch engine, which they sold to farmers. Okay? Now, the farmers liked the engine at first, and then they stopped liking the engine, and then eventually it went the way of the dodo. But the whole thing was it was a joke based on that. However, that could have been a real telephone number because the BR could have stood for a bridge. Okay, so maybe this car dealership is on the other side of a bridge. Or the car dealership may have been on Broadway Street of some particular town. So what you were doing, you were saying, oh, I want to dial up Broadway Street 549. So that would be the physical address, the physical numeric address of this business on Broadway Street, okay? Or there could have been a Browning Street in that town. You were trying to get a hold of Browning Street, and the physical address again would be 549. Boom, there you go. So, and of course it could have been Crestview Street or Crestwood Street. All of these are possibilities of what this could have been had it actually been a real telephone number. And I'm sure that somewhere along the line it may have actually been a real telephone number. In our case, just to take an example, now I used to live in Moweaqua, Illinois. This was long time ago. Eons. This is way back in my history. We're talking over 20 years ago. But what you would have had if you had been living in Moweaqua. Moweaqua was a very small town at that point. Maybe the MO, which would have been the prefix at that time, would have represented our town, Moweaqua, and then you would have had 83234 as your number. Okay? So instead of dialing a 7-digit number, you'd say, I want to dial MO 83234, which would have been my physical address. Of course, then again, that all changed when the early 1970s came along. All that was all modernized, and we have our telephone numbers as they are today. But, like I was saying, you could have had a telephone number. Those prefixes didn't have to be streets. They could have been bridges. They could have been whole towns. They could have been even states. If you were trying to dial the state of Washington, for instance, or trying to dial Washington, D.C., you would have said WA, and then you would have had a set of numbers. Boom. So BR549 could have actually been a real phone number at some point, somewhere. Of course, not that way anymore, but that's how the system used to work. And you can do all the research you want on this. You can leave me comments down here below. But like I said, Junior Samples and the Hee Haw crew took an old joke from an International Motor Company engine and turned it into a fictitious telephone number, which may have one time been a real telephone number. And they made a comedy sketch about it. Of course, then there was this country western band that took off on this and probably, as far as I know, still sings under the name BR549. But that's where that all comes from. Yes, there really were phone numbers like that. That was a long time ago, but they really were there. And like I said, what you could have had was, if that had actually been a real phone number, you could have said, okay, your business is on the other side of a bridge, and the physical address is 549, or your business is on Broadway Street, 549, so on and so forth. That's where it all came from. And you can, like I said, you can do the research on this. You can leave me comments down here below about all this. But anyway, that's where it really comes from. And it's kind of interesting. I had said in a previous video that there are some people that honestly believe that BR549 is a real phone number, and I'm like, oh, well, may have been at some point, but not anymore, because everything's all been standardized. But that's where it comes from. Now you know. You have a pretty good idea what's going on. Alright, like I said, you guys want to leave me comments below about all this? You are more than welcome to. I will tell you more in a future video, so stay tuned.